I once repaired lipstick off a Torah.
Are you serious?
I'm not. It's in my care of my Torah book.
Wow.
They say, please do not do this.
We're back here with Mordechai Pinchas Marc Michaels, who is a working scribe. He's a senior scholar at Cambridge University working on his PhD. And he was going to tell us now about this book he published, this book he wrote that was published by Brill, a very respectable academic publisher. And it's about Sefer Tagin or Sefer Tagin.
Or Tagin is actually the original title.
So I have a confession here to make. So in the last program we did a few years ago, in one of the episodes that we did, you mentioned Sefer Tagin. And we had a producer who works for me who contacted you and said, I think this was a mistake. Do you want us to correct it? And that person had based this on a Google search. And they didn't realize they're talking to one of the world's top experts on this Sefer Tagin. And you're like, well, actually, the Aramaic form.
Officially, it starts off with the introduction. It says, this is the Sefer Tagin, and it's not Tagin, but it's become known as Sefer Tagin because that's the plural. Tag is singular, Tagin is plural.
Well, I think Tagin would be plural in some forms of Aramaic.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So
in Hebrew, it sounds like smichut, but it's in Aramaic.
But I have now seen people calling them Tagim with a mem because it's the Hebrew, and it's like, no, that's not acceptable. That's going too far.
Tagin could be Hebrew in some dialects as well, like in Mishnaic Hebrew, like you'll have the yud nun mem ending instead of mem. So, all right. So what is Sefer Tagin? Sefer Tagin that you wrote a book
Sefer
about?
Tagin. So the book is called Sefer Tagin Fragments from the Cairo Geniza, and it's about this Masoretic manual that has.
And in the interest of full disclosure, I was one of the peer reviewers.
He was one of the peer reviewers.
So all right.
So there you go.
But I had some feedback, and it was revised, and a wonderful book. Now that I gave the feedback.
Absolutely. He's so modest. Right. And so basically it's a Masoretic manual which shows certain letters that are to be decorated. Now it's called Sefer Tagin, but actually not all the letters have Tagin. They're not. So Tagin are these little, in the Christian Bible, they refer to them as tittles. Okay. Right, so tittles, and they're decorations. Jots and tittles, which is from Matthew, and I think Luke repeats it. And nowadays they are sort of like sticks with balls on the end. Earlier they were sticks and stuff like that, but not all the letters are in fact decorated with these Tagin.
So they're little things that are. Look, I'm from the Midwest in the U.S. We call them doohickeys.
Doohickeys.
They're little doohickeys.
I think you called them doohickeys last time.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're little doohickeys that are. That's what we call them. Little like squiggles and doohickeys that are added to the letters.
Yeah. So they're decorative, and they have meaning, and people have invested Kabbalistic and spiritual meaning in them over time. All of the manuscripts are corrupt,
that's quite a statement. Let's start out with even what the manuscripts are of.
So the manuscripts. So there are various manuscripts of this book that has survived over time, and the one I found in the Cairo Geniza is in fact probably the oldest. So that was the one that was the core of the book, and then I found different fragments that connected to it.
So the book itself, basically. And I think this is important to explain. It's not that like every dalet is decorated.
No.
It's a specific instance of a specific dalet, which might be decorated in a specific way.
Yes.
But
different scribes over time, because the book became corrupt, right? So at one point there must have been a pristine copy of the original Sefer Tagin that was written in alphabetical order, and everybody knew.
And like in that book, for example, it might have said, the pay in this certain word in Exodus 15 always has a little swirly in it, right? And then you're saying over time there were differences in what those lists were, where to put the swirly and which letter.
So what happened is that over time, and I've got an article coming out on this, on the transmission of Sefer Tagin and how it.
Where's that article coming out?
Review of Rabbinic Judaism.
Okay.
At some point, you never know quite when things are going to come out.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Like I have articles that I wrote like 3 years ago that still haven't come out.
So I've no idea. I won't say it's going to come out. I don't know when. But certainly the first shift was away from the alphabetical format, so it got shifted to Parashah, so by section format. So the whole integrity of Sefer Tagin kind of broke down, and then the first manuscript that took it to Parashah format, which is in the British Library, that he left out ones because he missed entire
What do you mean
Parashah.
they took it to Parashah format? Tell us what
So
that
they
we had this
moved,
conversation this
they
morning.
moved it from alphabetical, so you get all the alepphs, all the bets, all the gimels, all the dalids,
okay.
and then they started. No, that's much harder for the scribe. I'm going to make it easier. I'm going to list them now by Parashah, so where they appear
by Torah
in
portion.
order.
Okay.
They appear in the Torah. So you'll get an aleph, a gimel, a hey, a z,
Okay.
a zayin, all the different letters, all mixed up, right? So all of the words suddenly become in Parashah order. Then
Well, isn't that easier for a scribe to work with?
in theory,
Okay,
but in the transmission, because it wasn't in an alphabetical list, he left some out.
Okay.
So there were errors in copying, but also he literally left out the odd parasha where there were maybe one or two instances, and he just forgot them.
Okay, I want to explore that just for a second. We were today looking at this Torah scroll. Talk about you just stumble into things. I went into this certain part of Cambridge University library, and I asked to see one thing, and discovered how there was this Torah scroll no one had ever looked at, as far as I know. Certainly not since like the 1980s. And they ended up bringing it out, and you were looking at it with me, and we were looking for a certain passage, and you said this is Parashat such and such, and I said this is numbers such and such. And you made a profound statement to me about.
I said you think of things in terms of verses, and I think of things in terms of parashah in sections.
Torah portions. So there must be some functional reason for that as a scribe.
It's more to do with the laning in the synagogue that we mentioned in the past. You read the weekly portion, so you learn the weekly portion, and there are 7 aliyot, so 7 people get up to read the portion.
So when you think of a certain pasuk, a certain verse, you think, oh, this is Parashat Balak.
Well, it's like when
and
you said,
I think this is of like the communal life or the cultural life, why they would break it up by parashah instead of by word. So that's so interesting. So the first version,
the verses were a Christian invention anyway.
The verses numbering, you might say, not the verses themselves. Those were
the verses were there because of the notation.
Right.
There is a soft pasuk. But the actual number, but there's differences, and I find that really difficult. The difference in the numbering systems between
that's especially confusing as the 10 Commandments, because there's 2 sets of ta'amim, of accent marks on almost every word, and so there's different ways of breaking up the verses and number. So even different Jewish editions in Hebrew of the Tanakh have different numbering systems for Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. That's confusing. I'll admit that. So all right, this is it. Yeah, and of course, like the chapters were numbered with some exceptions. Like for example, Psalms, those have numbers in some of the early manuscripts, the Hebrew manuscripts. But I think it was Bishop Stephen Langton in the 13th century who broke it up into chapters and fair enough.
One of my footnotes, I think, in the book.
Is it? But do you know the reason why Jews adopted that?
I have no idea.
So in the 15th century, I believe it was, they printed the first, it might have been the early 16th century, don't hold me to it. They printed the first concordance, and I believe it was called Meir Nativ, and they had no choice. They couldn't say for every single word in the Torah or Tanakh, they couldn't say, Parashat Naso, right? That's not going to work in Jeremiah. So they had to give the chapter number. I don't think they actually gave the verse number at that point, if I remember correctly, but they gave the chapter number. And after that, we were done. Jews couldn't help it. It was they would then have to print the Bibles with those chapter numbers to correspond to it. So,
yes, it's very confusing.
Yeah, but the concordance, the first Hebrew concordance, is what cemented that within the Jewish world. So
going back to your on that Torah, it was missing.
There was a sheet missing. Maybe more than one sheet. We
Yeah.
didn't count. We didn't spend that much time counting how many
But
letters
it
and
was
words.
a crucial
but,
sheet. The bit
Right.
I was looking for in particular.
right. So what's in that sheet that you were
So
looking
it's
for?
the nunin hafuchim, which are the upside down or reversed nuns.
Yeah.
Not nuns. Very important.
Right. You have a
distinction.
story about nuns, though. That
I
you
have
get
a story
to.
about nuns,
Okay.
which we will
But
get
tell
to.
us about the letters
the
nun.
letters nun, and
Yeah.
I've got a book on this as well. Sorry,
Okay. About the letters nun or the
Sefer
nuns?
well, both actually.
Nice.
And you do have to make a real big distinction. So
Okay.
the Sefer, and in fact, I did once have a thinking upside down nuns. That's not a good thing, right? That's not a good thing. So the nunim hafuchim, they are in effect brackets round two verses,
Yeah.
which is numbers 10, 35 to 30, 60. I'm doing it. It's good. I'm a
you
good
Googled
boy.
it, right?
No, I know these
you know
two
that one.
verses
Okay, fair
particularly well because I wrote,
right.
say, a book about literally those
Okay.
two verses called Sefer bin
And I wrote a book
Soa.
about number 6 in the priestly blessing. That's how I
There
did
you
that.
go.
Okay.
Yeah, excellent. So Sefer bin Soa, and it's the song of the ark, and it's basically when the ark went forward. Moses said, so Vayi bin Soa Aaron, Vayome
I'm gonna pull
Moshe,
that up here.
and they are the opening and closing verses of the Torah service as well on
So explain
Shabbat.
that, because some of our audience has never been to a service.
So in a synagogue,
what happens.
in the middle of the
Yeah.
in the middle of the service, so you have all the opening prayers and opening sort of psalms and songs, and then you have the Shema, which is the doxology and the key core prayer. Then you have the Amidah, which is the standing prayer. Then you have the Torah service, which is the center of the service.
So there's a part with every Shabbat where they take the Torah out of what's called an ark, and
Aaron HaKodesh.
Aron HaKodesh, which is interesting, the Holy Ark. Maybe that's a separate conversation. And before they bring it up to the bima where they read it, what happens?
So they process it round in a circuit.
They parade it around.
Parade it around, and you kiss it. So you take your talit, the tzitzit, which are the cords on the talit, and you press it to the Torah mantle or the tick, and then you kiss it, and as it passes, and in some communities who are less Sephardi, they'll bow. The more Ashkenazi.
What do you mean they bow? Tell me.
They'll bow to the Torah instead.
I don't know that I've ever seen that.
Yeah, they do. They bow to the Torah.
And which communities do that?
So the Reform communities, some of the Ashkenazi communities,
they bow to the Torah?
To the Torah, yeah.
I've literally never seen that. I've seen people who don't just, kiss the thing; they actually directly kiss.
Yes, and in fact, once,
which maybe isn't the most hygienic thing to do these days.
I once repaired lipstick off a Torah.
Are you serious?
I'm not. It's in my care of my Torah book.
Wow.
They say, please do not do this.
Okay.
People do try to fix stuff with packing tape and masking tape and staples.
I've seen masking tape
and biros but
I've seen Scotch tape.
But one of the worst ones was literally lipstick on the Torah. I mean,
That's because
you're supposed to
not...
love the Torah. Somebody went a bit too far.
Okay.
Kissed the Torah.
So they kiss the Torah. Some people bow to it. I'm a bit disturbed by that, but let's leave that.
Yeah. No, it's weird.
And then they Okay, so why were we talking about this? I forget.
Because you were in the service, so they go around.
So they recite the words when they open up the ark.
Yes, so
that's the part we're trying to get to.
You then, so at the start of the service, they'll say Vayi bin Soa Aaron.
Let me read it. It's numbers, like you said, 10, 35 to 36, and this is interesting. So it says, when the ark was to set out, this is JPS. When the ark was to set out, Moses would say, "Advance, O Lord, may your enemies be scattered, and may your foes flee from before you." And when it halted, he would say, "Return, O Lord, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands."
Yes.
And so, so before those two verses, there's an upside down nun, and after the two verses, there's an upside down nun.
Yes.
Okay.
And there are varying forms of that.
So it's not always just a simple nun that's upside down. Sometimes it has some decoration.
Some have decorations. Some looks more like a Z. Sometimes, as well, they put the nun not in the brackets.
Like a Z or a Zion?
Like a Z.
Like an actual Z?
Like a Z or an S. It's interesting. In the Zohar, they kind of say that. Okay. In the book, I've got loads of different variants of it. But in some of them, a different tradition arose where they started putting them in the words. Not in brackets between the verses.
Oh, wow.
They put them in the words. So they put them in bin Soa.
Oh, so
right?
oh
And
wow.
commit on an im,
Oh,
which
that's so
was later,
interesting.
and then there was another one where they put it as well.
So the normal way to do it is there's a space between before the section and after the section,
And then
and you're saying in some of them they actually interject it. They
yes,
put the nun backwards in some of the words.
yes.
Excuse me. Wow,
And in fact,
that's
there's a
cool.
picture of one of those from a 700-year-old Torah on the front of the book that happened to
Oh
be
wow.
in a scribe. So what my scribal teacher's colleague
Okay.
went to visit him, and
Mhm.
in his room behind him, massive frame
Yeah.
with a sheet of just that bit, where it had upside down nunim
Wait, and
in
this sheet was 700 years old?
she was 700 years
Where is
old.
this sheet today?
It probably in his or his descendant. I think he may have
We
passed away.
we need to find this sheet. There's not that many 700-year-old sheets.
Well, I've got photos. It's on the
Oh,
front of the
okay.
book.
I need to see that. Wow.
So yeah,
Maybe that's the missing sheet from the Torah scroll this
it's
morning.
possibly. I don't think it is, but certainly we need to find that as well. Missing sheets are not good, and I want to see. But people unfortunately used to do that. Sometimes they would cut out. In
Uh-huh.
fact, I had a go at a particular person who used to buy old Sifri and cut them up and put them in frames and sell them to different people.
Uh-huh.
And that's not a good thing.
So I once bought a sheet from a Torah scroll and I put it in a frame, and I went to Rabbi Goldstein at the Oat Institute in Jerusalem,
Yes.
and I asked him, I said, I want to make sure, I'm not Orthodox. I want to make sure this isn't disrespectful towards Orthodox people. He said, no, I've got one like that right over there on
Yeah,
my
yeah,
wall.
it's better than them going in the garbage, but
Okay.
it's still not. If it's a fragment, that's not
Yeah.
a problem. If it's deliberately cut up
Okay.
to do that,
Well, I didn't cut it.
that
I don't
is a
know. I don't know
problem.
what the person who sold it to me did.
Yeah,
So
that's the problem. There are
okay, I
people
see.
who will cut up, and they do it on eBay still now.
Yeah.
You'll see they've taken sheets out of old
Mhm.
Yemenite Sefer Torah, sort of 300, 400 years old, and cut them up and sell them as this passage, that passage.
Okay. I've seen that on eBay, and I've bought a few of those. Now I don't know that they cut it up, right?
Yeah, they
You're
do.
saying that, and you might be right. I actually bought one that was 2 sheets that I have in my living room from a Yemenite scroll, and I thought it was unusual because normally you only see a single sheet for sale, and this was 2 sheets
No, I think
attached.
they take the old Sifri and they cut them
Is
up.
that what they're doing? Okay.
Because I've actually come
Interesting.
across people who do that. I've even come
Okay.
across one where they were selling it as a Megillah to Esther, a book of Esther.
Yeah.
And what they'd done is they'd cut out single amudim from a Torah, turn them the other way round, and attach them to rollers on the side and pretended it was a Megillah Esther.
And they were just assuming whoever buys it doesn't know any better.
Yes,
Wow. And that's on eBay?
that's on eBay.
Wow.
I had a real go at them.
Wow. That is wow.
So you have to be really careful.
And you're sure those people who were selling it just weren't that ignorant that they had no idea what it was?
No, they weren't ignorant. They were
Okay,
just
they
trying
were
to make
deliberate.
a quick buck.
Wow, that's disturbing.
It is.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So where do these backwards nuns come from? You explained this morning to one of the librarians, which
so Emmanuel Tov, and actually I don't think he was the first person because I think Ginsburg came up with it first. Said in effect that they are anti-sigma and sigma. So the brackets, because the Greeks used to use it as well, to fundamentally say these verses are not in the right place. So instead of putting dots over the letters, which is another way of doing it, they used to put them in brackets to say this has been mistranscribed.
So there's two ways of looking at this. I want to be careful here. So there are these bracket symbols in Greek manuscripts, and
they're also in the Dead Sea Scrolls,
and in some Hebrew manuscripts indicate an erasure,
indicating
and sometimes
an erasure. Well, either that something shouldn't be there,
right,
or it's in the wrong place.
Okay,
so it should be there.
Yeah.
So these two verses should be there.
They should just be somewhere
but
else.
They should be somewhere else in the text.
So I want to.
And I'm working on that at the moment.
Okay.
I have a theory.
So this isn't my theory, but this is a theory that I'm about to share, which some scholars have, which is that these functioned as an erasure, and the reason that the erasure was there was that somebody had looked at this and said, this is theologically problematic. And why is it theologically problematic? Because the ark comes out, and Moses doesn't say, advance, O ark of the Lord. He says, advance, O Yud-He-Vav-He, O Lord. And then when the ark comes back, he doesn't say return, O ark of the Lord. It says return, O Yud He Vav He. And so someone may have looked at this. Again, this isn't my theory, but this is a theory that's out there among some textual scholars, that somebody, a couple thousand years ago looked at this and said, this is theologically problematic, erase, delete. And the way they delete is they put the sigma and the anti-sigma, what looked like backwards nuns. And I'm not saying that's my explanation. What is important is that every copy of the Masoretic text either has this or is supposed to have it. And so whenever it happened, must have been at least around 2,000 years ago, if not more. That's the interesting thing. And every copy we have of the Torah, let's say outside the Samaritan text, every Jewish copy we have of the Torah descends from some master copy which had this notation in it.
Yes.
So that's the key thing from my perspective. Whichever of those explanations is correct.
And one of the explanations is that it was separated off because it's an entire book all by itself.
Right. And that's actually in some rabbinical sources.
It's in rabbinical sources. Okay. So I cover that in the book. And that's the reason I wrote a book called Sefer Tagin, because it's if it's such an important book, why? Mm-hmm. And
although book back then could be any written document.
Exactly.
Right. Like I remember when I studied paleography, Canaanite paleography, right? Or sorry, they called it epigraphy. Studied ancient Canaanite texts, and they would have a tombstone, or not a tombstone. It was a sarcophagus, and on the side of the sarcophagus, it would say, something like "Zeh Sefer such and such." This is the book of so and so, king of the Sidonians, and you're like, book? It's like 10 lines in the side of a sarcophagus, but
it's a record.
Anything written could have been called a sefer, a book at some point. So it could have just been a scroll, a single scroll. Well, look, I mean, in the Torah in general, one of the I think Ibn Ezra suggests that the Torah was, maybe it's Abarbanel, I don't know. One of these rabbis suggested, and I think he's right, the Torah was a series of these scrolls that were maybe stuck in a jar together, and they were sewn together, and then they weren't always sewn together in chronological order, and that's why Numbers chapter 1 is a date, famously, which is after Numbers chapter 9, which also has a date. And the date, right? So Numbers 9 had to have taken place. Doesn't mean it had to have been written, but it had to have been taken place before Numbers 1. And this is in the middle there. Well, no, it's just afterwards, Numbers 10. So where do you think this originally fit? Do you have a theory about that?
I do. I'm working on it.
Okay. You're not going to share that because that's unpublished.
That's unpublished.
Proprietary research. Just tell me, I won't tell anybody else.
You said that last time, and the whole world heard. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So anyway, don't make that same mistake twice.
I'm not going to do that again. No, absolutely not.
And so people can read more about that on. Tell us again what your website is.
So there's software.co.uk.
Okay.
And if they're interested in the books, there's kulmus.co.uk. So kulmus means
kulmus?
Kulmus.
Okay. And what is a kulmus?
Kulmus is basically the quill from calamus, the Greek.
Right. Which I think originally refers to a reed.
Exactly.
Okay.
But now it's a quill.
Okay. Gotcha. Yes. Beautiful. This has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for joining me. Any final words for the audience?
If you ever come across anything in a manuscript you think looks really interesting, please let us know.
Okay. How can they contact you and let you know?
Through the website. There's a form that you can fill in. So if you ever come
I'm just going to warn you, there's going to be people who, because I get this, where they send you all kinds of like, oh, my friend went on holiday and they bought this thing and they want you to, is that okay if people contact you with that?
Only if it's genuinely interesting.
Well, it's interesting to them.
That's true.
Okay.
In fact, I read a story, and I'll close with this. Because last time we were at the Holocaust Memorial Scroll Trust. Yeah. So I read a story about a guy who took I think it was in a book about Hebrew manuscripts by Marc Michaels. I've forgotten his surname, but it's very similar to mine. So anyway, it's about guy who brought him a manuscript, brought him a book.
Yeah.
And it was, I think it was a Siddur, and it wasn't that old, and it wasn't special in any way, from what he could tell. And he was about to say, "Why are you bothering me?" And then the guy said, "This is the Siddur I kept in the Nazi death camp with me." Okay. And it was the thing, and I hid it, and I made sure they didn't see it, so I could pray. So suddenly, it wasn't old, but it was special.
Okay, wow.
And he learned that lesson to not jump to conclusions. And so something, as you say, something that might not be that interesting on the face of it could be extraordinarily interesting.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for joining us.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.